This tutorial will be on passing parameters from JavaScript to handler CFC using Ajax call. From the previous tutorial we had was handler.getSomeData, and we just did an entity load on our users table and brought back the data back here in a for loop, and then we did some div cloning to display the results. This time we were going to send data, so we're going to change this function to send some data, and in the handler CFC I'm going to make a function called send some data. So the way that I usually send data, you can send it in individual strings or individual parameters, but one method that I've been using is to send it in an object literal. So that way you can fill up an object literal inside a for loop, or just basically send all your data in one object and then parse it on the other side. So how to get the data ready for that, you just create an empty object, iData, and then create your object literal of the data that you want to pass. In this case, since our table was set up with a username and a password, I'm just going to put a username and password inside our U object literal. And just to test right now, I'm just going to hard code this. We're going to push that object literal back into our array object, and then we're going to make another object literal with one main name, JSStat, and this you want to keep consistent because this is the variable name that we're going to read from the CFC side. So then type JSON stringify your data, your iData, your array with your just single object literal of your data that you want to pass, and this is the actual data that we're going to send. So now in our function, on our Ajax request, inside the data parameter that before we had as a blank, we're just going to put data, and this data is now referring to this object literal that we're passing from our package data inside here. And then on the success, I'm just going to print the parsed data D. So now that we're sending that send some data, and we're sending the object literal that, again, this JSStat is the name to remember here. We're going to go to our send some data function, and then inside here we want to set our data from JavaScript equal to deserialize JSON rc.jsstat. So here we're receiving the data from this package. Since it's stored into this JSStat, we're doing JSStringify. It's landing here, and now we have it all encapsulated inside here. So just to test that it's working, I'm just going to return. And again, we don't have to use the actual CF return statement because we're already doing that with our set view to handler return RC. And then just in case as a review, if you go to handler and return RC CFM, we're just outputting the serialized value of the RC. So down here, I'm just going to put cf set rc dot user equals data from JS 1 dot username. So that's again reading the JSStat dot username. So it should come back as test user on our JavaScript side. And if we test this, I'm just going to reload the application. So now we see that the object that we're getting back is that we have our JS stat in there just because that's being stored in the RC, and this is the data that we're passing to it, right? It has our username and our password. This is coming from the JavaScript side, and then this user variable is this rc.user that we're setting here, and that's coming back as test user. So it's working. We have the username coming from this data object. So if we want to test, we would test like a basic user login system. We could just put cfset user equals data from js1.username and cfset password pass equals password. Okay, so now we're sending these variables, and then just to test on the database, I have Blitz and Craig as the password, username and password. So I'm just going to send Blitz and Craig hard-coded in there. Everything else is fine. And then now we have the variables here in our CFC. So we want to check if that user exists with that password, right? So basic user login system. We could do a cfset login check equals EntityLoad from our users table with where the username equals user and the password equals pass. And then right now, since this entity load by default, if you don't pass the true or false variable at the end, it's going to return an array. But since right now we're just checking if one user exists, we're not going to have duplicate entries, and we're only expecting one value to return. We want to set that true or false boolean to true. So now, when it's true, it's going to expect a single entity. So when we try to do this, and now that I said try, it's always good to put all your, whenever you're doing entity loads or pretty much anything that errors can happen in your code, you want to encase it in a try-catch statement with ColdFusion. This is how you write one of those. We're using Rails right now, but I mean it's the same way. So I'm just going to put cf try, and then the catch, I'm going to log it to this file that I know it's always going to be mine, and then the function, I'm just going to put that we're inside send some data, and even handler.send some data, so we know exactly where that error is going to occur if it happens. So now we're setting login check to entity load users, where the username is the user variable passed from the JavaScript, and the password is the password variable passed from the JavaScript. And we're expecting a single entity, so we're putting true here. So now since we're checking a single entity, if this doesn't land on anything, it's going to return null. So to check whether or not the login was successful, I'm just going to put cf if is null login check, and that's about it. Cf else. I guess I'll put it in a results variable, cf set rc.results equals login fail, and cf set rc.results login success. So now when we run this, I'm going to do application reload. And when we click our button, it's going to say our results variable here. It's going to, since this didn't come back null, since we're passing the hard-coded value of Blitz and Craig, it's going to come back as login success. And then there you could store however you want to handle your user login. You know, you can store a session variable, or a couple different ways to do that. But just to show that it's working as well, we're going to pass in, you know, an incorrect username, and then rerun this. So now we see the results back as the login failed, since that username and password didn't match up to the username and password that I have over here. And then again, if you actually want to make this into you would put into a working example, you would just put an input So I just made 2 input fields, and I'm reading the data whenever I click the button. It's going to run demo. So that's where I want to package the data. And inside that data is just storing that object literal with the actual values of our input fields that I just added. So now when we run this, it should give us 2 input fields. Look up a Blitz and Craig in the password fields. It should be login success, and then some other user for whatever password. We click again, we're going to see login fail, and that's a basic user login system.